What if an African president stood before the world and said, "We don't need your money, we need control"? What do you think would happen? It was a scorching afternoon in Berlin. Inside the G7 summit, all eyes turned to a man dressed in earth-toned traditional robes. No tie, no script, no apologies. He stood tall and spoke with fire. "I don't want your billions. I want machines. I want factories, owned by us. I want our children to study under real roofs, not rusty tin sheets." In the front row, an IMF official closed his folder. A French diplomat started dialing frantically, and one Western journalist whispered, "He just declared war. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. And what he did wasn't just refuse aid, he broke a spell that made Africa forget its true power. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid his people would forget how to dream. Africa was once torn open by the blade of conquest, its resources stolen, its children enslaved on their own soil. That pain cannot be forgotten. Yet from the ashes, faith in God still burns. Share this video, so the world hears our cry turned into a vow. Africa will rise and reclaim everything. Mr. President, are you aware that by walking out, you've jeopardized nearly $8 billion in pledge support? The words were sharp, delivered by a U.S. envoy whose smile masked fury. Cameras clicked. Microphones blinked red. Traoré didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone. "Madam Ambassador," he said calmly, "was that money ever truly mine? Or was it a leash stitched with conditions sealed with signatures I never authored? Silence." The room, a press conference after the G7 summit, had been designed for damage control. It became a battlefield of ideology. President Traoré, a French journalist, interrupted. "Are you declaring a return to isolationism?" He turned eyes unwavering. "No," he said. "I am declaring the end of colonial dependence masked as partnership. Call it isolation if you fear a sovereign Africa." At that moment, the room trembled not from sound, but from implication. One leader, one refusal, and suddenly the economic order seemed negotiable. Within hours, headlines circled the globe. Traoré walks away from Western alliance, a hero or a hazard. Burkina Faso faces sanctions as tensions rise. The boycott begins. Who's next? Inside Burkina Faso, protests erupted, but they were not against Traoré. They were against history. Students marched carrying placards. "We are not beggars, we are builders." Elders wept not out of fear, but because they remembered Sankara, and they saw him again. 2 nights later, a private hotel suite in Accra, a European trade minister sits across from Traoré. No cameras, no script. "You've made your point," the minister says. "Now let us help you save face. Re-enter the agreement quietly. We'll adjust the clauses." Traoré sips his tea, places the cup down gently. "You think I'm here to bargain, but you've misunderstood me. What do you want?" the minister snaps. Traoré leans forward, his voice cold. "Dignity, not dollars, and factories, not promises." The minister's face hardens. "This won't end well for you." Traoré stands up. "For me, perhaps, but for Africa, it's already beginning." Across the Sahel, presidents in Mali and Niger issue joint statements of solidarity. In Kenya, youth groups rally. In South Africa, musicians drop mixtapes titled Traoré Mode. And in Washington, panic brews. "He's a populist, a disruptor. Dangerous," says a senator in a closed-door hearing. But in the streets of Bobo Dioulasso, a woman says softly to her daughter, "You see that man on the screen? That's what a lion looks like when it roars without firing a gun." The night was silent in Ouagadougou, but in the presidential quarters death had entered. It came not with bullets or drones, but in a cup of imported tea, gifted by a visiting diplomat, brewed by loyal hands, swallowed without suspicion. 2 hours later, Ibrahim Traoré collapsed. His guards called it fatigue. His doctor knew better. Poison, precise, delayed, Western grade. The presidential residence went into lockdown. Hospitals cleared 2 wings. Rumors flew through the capital. They've taken him. He's dead. France wants him gone. But inside that hospital room, beneath the dim fluorescent light, Traoré was not alone. His breath slowed, machines beeped, and then silence. But in his mind something cracked open. He stood not in the hospital, but in a wide, dusty plain. Before him stood a man in military khaki with a saxophone slung over his shoulder. "Comrade," the man said. Ibrahim Traoré blinked. "You?" "I know your face," the man smiled. "Thomas Sankara." The desert around them pulsed. Ghosts of past revolutions echoed. Congo, Guinea, Ghana. Sankara stepped forward. "You're doing well, but you're walking into a lion's mouth." "I knew the risk," said Traoré. "No," Sankara replied. "You knew the price, but not the method. They won't shoot you first. They'll isolate you, choke you, make your people question you." Traoré clenched his fists. "I can withstand betrayal, but can your people?" Sankara whispered. Back in the real world, international media spun narratives. Is Traoré fit to lead medical concerns, raise questions over Burkina Faso's direction? Traoré unstable, anonymous sources speak. And yet something strange happened. Instead of doubting, the people doubled down. Mothers prayed. Youth lit candles. Artists painted his face across crumbling walls. And on the 3rd night, the monitors beeped faster. Ibrahim Traoré opened his eyes. He spoke to no one for 12 hours. Then he summoned his cabinet. "I have seen the map," he told them. "And it's not drawn in Geneva or Paris. We will begin restructuring, not with foreign aid, but with local control." He announced a National People's Forum, 10,000 citizens, hand-picked by local elders and unions. They would rewrite the Constitution. He canceled 3 Western contracts for mining rights. He issued bonds not in dollars, but in West African eco, backed by cotton and gold reserves. And then he declared a Thomas Sankara Day, not as a holiday, but as a workday of free labor across the nation. We build with our hands what they refuse to fund. Washington imposed sanctions. Paris froze assets. Brussels suspended aid, but Burkina Faso didn't buckle, because Ibrahim Traoré had already made his real investment in hearts. The youth of Bamako began wearing shirts printed with Africa for Africans. In Ghana, a new podcast called Sankara's Air hit 1 million listeners. In Jamaica, a poet named Leanne recited, "They poisoned him with silence, but he roared through memory." And then at a UN session, an African ambassador stood and said, "Gentlemen, perhaps you should sanction our dignity too." Now I ask you, the viewer, what would you do if your president risked his life not for power, but for your freedom? Would you believe him? Stand by him, or wait for CNN to tell you what to think? Ibrahim Traoré is not perfect. No leader is. But in a continent where too many presidents kneel, he dared to stand. And when they tried to silence him, he dreamed louder. The sun never rose on that morning in Ouagadougou. The sky hung gray, ash-thick. Rain threatened, but none fell. Something else was about to break. Captain Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the abandoned train station at 5:30 sharp. No sirens, no motorcade, just boots on concrete breath, visible in the morning cold. By 7 o'clock, 3,000 farmers, teachers, welders, and widows stood in line. No security checks, no titles. They were called delegates of the soil. This was no parliament of neckties and leather chairs. This was the People's Assembly, called by decree of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, held not in marble halls, but underground in the tunnels left behind by the colonial freight lines. A space once used to smuggle gold to Europe would now carry something far heavier. No television cameras were allowed, only community radio and 1 scribe for every 10 speakers. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood not at a podium, but in the center, equal height, eye level. He began, "If democracy means waiting every 5 years to choose between the corrupt and the compromised, then we need another name for what we are about to build." A mechanic from Bobo Dioulasso stood up. We don't need parliaments to clap for foreign deals. We need justice that speaks Moray and works in the rain. A mother from Kaya cried, I lost 3 sons to a war funded by people who shake our president's hand. What do I vote for if not for peace? One by one they spoke. Their pain became policy. Their anger turned into structure. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't interrupt once. He wrote, he listened, he nodded, he changed. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away in Brussels, panic settled in polished hallways. One diplomat from the EU whispered, We're not losing a country, we're losing control. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had issued another challenge this time to the very language of governance. He proposed replacing the National Assembly with the People's Forum, a rotating council of citizens drawn every year like jury duty. The West called it chaos, but African youth called it logic. Why should I trust a man with 14 cars and 2 Swiss accounts to speak for my village, with no water from a university protest in Dakar? They tried to block him, sanctions, frozen assets, warnings. But every time they spoke, Captain Ibrahim Traoré grew louder. On the 3rd day of the assembly, a girl named Maimouna stood up. She was 17, thin, wore a faded school uniform. She walked to the center, raised a scrap of torn fabric. This was my brother's shirt. He died carrying uranium for a French-owned mine. I don't want a flag that flies above his grave without speaking for him. The room fell silent. Then a retired soldier stepped forward. He laid his military beret on the ground. I fought under a flag that bowed to others. Let's make one that kneels to no one. Captain Ibrahim Traoré spoke then, not as president, but as a witness. Tomorrow we sew a new flag, and it must be stitched by hands that bled for this soil. CNN called it the unraveling of order. Al Jazeera called it an African Renaissance. BBC called it dangerous romanticism. But in Accra, Nairobi, Harare whispers grew louder. What if we built our own assemblies? What if our presidents listened before they spoke? What if we had a Captain Ibrahim Traoré? By the end of the week, 763 voices had spoken. Each word was recorded, translated, archived. From this they drafted the Waga Declaration, a founding charter of values, not laws. It stated no decision shall be made in the name of the people without their physical presence. Foreign aid must declare its cost, not in money but in dignity. Every child who plants a tree shall be listed in the National Register as a builder of the Republic. Captain Ibrahim Traoré signed it with red ink drawn from local soil. The next morning he was gone. No farewell speech, no press release. Only a handwritten note on the bench where he sat each dawn. When leaders stop listening, bury them under the voices of their people. When I return, I will come not as your president, but as your equal. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. They searched for him. Some said he crossed into Ghana. Others said he joined a Tuareg caravan to the north. But what mattered wasn't where he went. What mattered was what stayed behind a structure, a seed, and a name carried like thunder across a continent. 10 times they whispered it across valleys and into classrooms. 10 times it echoed from graffiti to gospel, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The candlelight flickered against the mud-brick walls of a school in Koudougou. Chalk scribbles still visible on the board. It was past midnight. 5 students sat huddled eyes glued to a flickering projector screen. No Netflix, no TikTok. They were watching a shaky bootleg copy of an underground speech. The man on the screen wasn't in uniform. He was in a faded linen shirt, sitting under a tree holding a child on his knee. Leadership is not power, he said. It's a rental. The people can take it back any time. The room went quiet. Then one boy whispered, Captain Ibrahim Traoré said that a week before the poison. The others nodded. No one spoke, but all of them silently made a vow. If he dies tomorrow, we will speak his name, not as fans, but as builders. Under the Ministry of Memory, an office created by Traoré himself, 12 volunteers began a dangerous task, digitizing every order speech and interview of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. They called it the Memory Bank. One volunteer, Mariam, discovered something strange. In a confidential memo to his generals, Traoré had written, "If I disappear, don't avenge me. Bury me with no flag. If I live, it's to serve. If I die, let the soil carry my message. Let the people decide what it meant." This wasn't just a revolution, it was an open-source legacy. In a town near the Ghana border, a teacher asked her class, "What does Captain Ibrahim Traoré mean to you?" A girl raised her hand, "He made my father stop drinking." Another replied, "He built a water pump without asking the World Bank." Then a third, the smallest, said softly, "He made us think Africa is not poor, just stolen." And the teacher began to cry, because she knew these children had never seen a president hold a shovel, until Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But not all believed. In the capital, whispers spread, "He's a populist. He hides in symbolism. Where is the real structure?" And one night, a top advisor vanished, his safe emptied, his family gone. Inside a single note, "The revolution eats its architects." A trap had been laid. Traoré knew it. He summoned his core team. "This is the test," Captain Ibrahim Traoré said, "not of my loyalty to the people, but of theirs to each other." Despite death threats, despite sanctions, the people gathered, 10,000 strong, no stage, no lights. Just one man in a plain shirt standing on an overturned tractor. Captain Ibrahim Traoré raised both fists and shouted, "I do not lead Burkina Faso. I serve a voice louder than mine." And then he handed the microphone to a teenager, a girl, blind since birth. She said, "I've never seen his face, but I've felt his work under my feet." Thunder erupted, not from the clouds, from the crowd. That was the moment. Captain Ibrahim Traoré became more than a man. He became an echo. A griot in Mali composed a poem titled, "Traoré will return in the wind." It traveled across WhatsApp like wildfire. If you kill the body, the soil will write his name. If you steal his voice, the drums will repeat it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, you walked into fire, but lit 1,000 more. That poem was found later, etched into the wall of a refugee camp. In Geneva, at the African Union meeting, a proposal was passed, backed secretly by France and the US, to declare Traoré's political model as anti-democratic. It was meant to isolate him. But when the motion was read, something unexpected happened. 6 nations abstained, 3 walked out, and one, Kenya, stood and said, "Before you condemn Captain Ibrahim Traoré, ask yourselves, what have your democracies built in Africa besides debt and dependence?" The room went silent. History had shifted by one sentence, one stance. Weeks later, a sealed letter arrived at the Ministry of Memory. It was written in Traoré's own hand. Inside it read, "To my people. If you read this, I am gone, not as a martyr, but as a man who believed we are more than survivors. Build without me, dream beyond me, and if you must remember me, do not build statues, build schools. Yours, Captain Ibrahim Traoré." So today, even in silence, even in danger, one name continues like the drumbeat beneath every African step. They said Africa was cursed, broken, always one coup away from collapse. But then came a man with no crown, no Swiss account, no Paris mansion, just a will to rewrite the contract between the land and its people. A man who dared to say, "We do not need pity. We need power. We do not need donations. We need dignity. And we do not need leaders. We need servants who fear the people more than they fear the West." His name was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and whether you love him, doubt him, fear him, or follow him, you cannot ignore what he sparked. What if Africa never needed to be saved, only remembered? He reminded us that the gold beneath our soil is not more valuable than the soul of our people, that flags are not sacred unless they shelter the hungry, that the word sovereignty must come with sweat, not slogans. And now the world watches. Some pray he fails. Some hope he fades. But others, millions, have already changed. Because of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a boy in Zimbabwe, just started building a drone from spare parts. Because of him, a girl in Liberia just told her mother she wants to become president. Because of him, thousands now speak the word freedom, not as a wish, but a timeline. So now it is your turn. You watching this, you holding a phone in your hand, wondering if one share makes a difference. It does. Because this story isn't about one man. It's about a continent waking up. It's about you. Will you repeat the old script of defeat, or will you write a new line? If you believe Africa deserves better, drop a comment, New Africa. If you believe our children should inherit sovereignty, not sanctions, share this video. Not for the views, not for the algorithm, but because the world must hear us. Because the soil remembers. Because Africa is rising. And this time, it's not a question of if, it's only a matter of how. They called it madness. They said no one could build a nation on memory and dreams alone. That you needed treaties, balance sheets, and IMF compliance. But what they didn't understand, what they refused to understand, was that something had shifted beneath the soil of Burkina Faso. Something ancient. Something unstoppable. It wasn't just about Traoré anymore. It was about the old woman in Dédougou who planted her first tree because a boy told her builders don't wait. It was about the mechanic who stopped fixing land cruisers for ministers and started building plows for farmers. It was about the children who rewrote their national anthem in classrooms without chalk. And somewhere in the hills outside Kaya, a shepherd carved a single sentence into stone: the land remembers. That was the real revolution. While the West scrambled to control the narrative with headlines, sanctions, and talking heads, Africa was writing a new story with its hands, its sweat, and its silence. The disappearance of Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not break the movement. It ignited it. Whispers turned into action. Streets became classrooms. Villages became parliaments. Every market, every mosque, every music hall echoed a single vow: we are not poor, we are preparing. In a small fishing town by the Black Volta River, a group of mothers met every evening after prayer. They weren't politicians. They didn't understand geopolitics. But they understood hunger. They understood dignity. One of them stood and said, "We have breastfed both children and sorrow, but now we must breastfeed the future." The next day, they started a community farm on abandoned land that once belonged to a French agro company. No permit, no permission, just purpose. And in Tamale, northern Ghana, a young engineer built a generator powered by river currents. When asked why he did it, he answered, "Because Captain Traoré said we shouldn't wait for the lights, they never came." Across the continent, the word Traoré had evolved. It was no longer just a name. It was a question, a challenge, a code whispered between strangers: do you still kneel? Not since Traoré. Meanwhile, in a glossy tower in Brussels, a Western analyst warned his superiors, "You can no longer control them with fear. They are afraid of forgetting now, not dying." The soil was speaking, the winds carried the stories, and still no sign of him. But that didn't matter, not anymore, because the boy in Benin, who learned to code using a broken laptop, said it best: maybe Traoré isn't hiding. Maybe he became us. The African Union scrambled to redefine democracy. Western banks offered revised aid packages with more dignity clauses. But the people were already ahead. In Ouagadougou, the People's Assembly reconvened without a president. Elders took notes from children. Mechanics debated economists. No one wore suits. No one needed to. And on the fifth day, a girl stood up. She held a photograph of her grandfather, a cocoa farmer who died in debt to a foreign lender. She said, if we inherit their debt, then we should also inherit their rage and their hope. Applause wasn't necessary. Everyone simply stood. Across Africa, statues began to fall, not because Traoré told them to, but because the people finally understood they didn't need marble to remember. They needed movement. In Nairobi, a graffiti artist painted on a wall, "A lion does not ask to be seen, he roars." In Lagos, a singer released an anthem that was downloaded 1,000,000 times overnight. Its chorus, "We build with broken hands and holy rage." In Dakar, a young girl delivered a speech to her class with trembling hands. Her final words, "I am not my passport. I am my people." And in the vault of the Ministry of Memory, the archivist made one final entry under status missing, next to Captain Ibrahim Traoré's name still speaking. Because even now, no one knows where he went, but everyone knows what he left behind, not a legacy, not a blueprint, a mirror. And when Africa looked into it for the first time in a long time, it saw itself. It began with a rumor, a whisper among farmers in the south, carried on motorbikes and donkey carts. "He's alive." They said he had been seen walking through the markets of Dori, his face wrapped in a scarf, buying nothing, just listening. No one had proof, no video, just a feeling. But that was enough, because hope once planted in the hearts of a people who had been told to beg does not die easily. It spreads like wildfire through dry season brush, unstoppable, unpredictable, divine. By sunrise, markets opened early. Radios played protest songs instead of ads. In Bobo Dioulasso, an imam stood at the pulpit and recited not a sermon, but the Waga Declaration, line by line, as if it were scripture. Children stopped saying, "When I grow up, I'll leave." Now they said, "When I grow up, I'll build," and the world watched nervous. CNN ran a headline, "Traoré's shadow, a ghost presidency." Le Monde called it a dangerous cult of personality, but they were missing the point. Traoré was no longer a man. He was a symbol, and symbols don't die. They multiply. In Niamey, a group of teachers reopened abandoned classrooms, unpaid and unarmed. On the blackboard they wrote, "This school answers to the soil, not to Paris." In Accra, a grandmother refused a care package from an NGO. "My grandson built me a stove from clay and a solar panel from scrap." Why should I kneel for powdered milk? In Bamako, youth held a night vigil, not for a death, but for a future. They wrote their dreams on lanterns and released them into the sky. One simply read, "Tell Traoré we heard him." Meanwhile, in the back rooms of diplomacy, panic turned into strategy. A high-level meeting was held in Washington. The phrase "contain the contagion" appeared in memos. Economic models were updated. Threat levels adjusted. Traoré's face appeared in briefings typically reserved for armed insurgents. But what frightened them most wasn't a speech. It was the silence that followed. He had not posted, he had not broadcast, he had not returned, because power had returned to the people, and that was more dangerous than any bullet. In the capital, the People's Forum voted to transform 3 colonial mansions into libraries. When asked what to name them, a child from the crowd yelled, "Call them borrowed time, because we're done borrowing dignity," and the vote passed. Something remarkable happened next. Soldiers began building roads without orders. Doctors began working overtime without salaries. Mothers began planting gardens without permission. It was chaos, but it was holy chaos. A nation in motion not because of command, but because of conviction. And then one morning in Ouagadougou, a boy named Issa found something beneath a tree. It was a book, old, weathered, wrapped in cloth. On the first page was a handwritten line. "If you want to lead Africa, first walk barefoot through its silence." It. No one knew if it was real, but no one cared. It joined the hundreds of artifacts now displayed in the People's Museum, a warehouse turned memory palace, curated by the public. Each item had no price, only a story. A hoe used to dig a freedom well in Gawa, a sewing needle from the woman who made the first new flag, a pair of sandals left behind at a protest in Tenkodogo, and a microphone shattered, dented, still dusty, used by Traoré the night he handed it to the blind girl. On the wall above it in bold letters was painted, "Let the world hear what they tried to silence." At that moment, it didn't matter if he ever came back, because his absence had become their awakening. But deep in the northern highlands among thorn trees and shifting dunes, a nomad passed a campfire to a traveler with tired eyes. The traveler thanked him. The nomad nodded and said quietly, "Your silence changed the weather." The traveler smiled, then disappeared into the dark. No horns, no banners, no national broadcast, just the scent of dust and mango leaves on the wind, just a footstep, then another. He walked into the capital at dawn, not on red carpet but on cracked pavement, not in a convoy but alone. A boy selling water was the first to notice. He stared at the man's face, weathered, quiet, familiar. The man raised one finger to his lips. The boy nodded wide-eyed and whispered, "He's back." But it wasn't the kind of return anyone expected. There was no power grab, no throne reclaimed, no speech. Instead, Captain Ibrahim Traoré went to the People's Museum, not as an exhibit, not as a guest, but as a visitor. He stood in front of the glass case holding the cracked microphone, the one from the rally of 10,000. He didn't touch it. He just bowed his head. A security guard approached him. "You want to speak again?" Sir Traoré shook his head. "No, I came to listen." The museum curator, barefoot, young, nervous, offered him a chair. Traoré declined. "I've sat long enough," he said. That afternoon, word of his presence spread, not by decree, but by mouth. Women left their cooking fires to walk in silence. Farmers paused their plows mid-furrow. Children came with notebooks, not for autographs, but for answers. And still, he said little. He simply asked them one by one. "What did you build while I was gone?" A girl answered, "I taught my village to read." A mechanic said, "I turned my garage into a water pump station." An elder added, "We tore down the statue of the foreign general. We planted millet where his feet once stood." Traoré nodded at each, and with every story his silence grew heavier, because he realized something. They had become the leaders he prayed for. In his absence, they had not collapsed. They had risen, like seeds cracking open beneath the weight of forgotten rain. And that's when he knew he was no longer necessary. Not in the way presidents pretend to be, not as a savior, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. So that night, under a broken lantern in the heart of the capital, he wrote one final letter. "To my fellow citizens, I did not fight so you would need me. I fought so you would no longer wait for someone like me. I am returning power to where it always belonged, with you. If I ever return again, it will be as a student. Teach me what you built. Teach me how to serve." He signed it not as president, not even as captain, just Ibrahim. The next morning, the letter was found pinned to the museum door. He was gone again, but this time no one panicked, because he had left behind more than legacy. He left infrastructure of the soul, a rewritten constitution with clauses drafted by villagers, a water system funded not by foreign donors but by labor collectives, a national education day where children, not officials, led the classrooms, and most of all, a shift, in posture, in pride, in possibility. Burkina Faso became a whisper of hope across borders, a blueprint for those who dared to dream beyond the ballot. A melody hummed in Lagos, in Lilongwe, in Lusaka: build before they tell you you can't. Western analysts were baffled. No coup, no civil war, no IMF collapse. Just a nation moving forward, slow, imperfect, united. In Geneva, a delegate asked sharply, "What did Traoré leave behind?" An African ambassador replied, "He left behind permission," and that was enough. Because across the continent, more captains were rising, not in military uniforms, but in community centers. Not with flags, but with shovels. Not to rule, but to rebuild. And on a warm evening in a village without a name, A girl stood before her classmates. Her voice steady, her eyes bright. She said, "My name is Aminata. I don't want to be a president. I want to be a listener." Because one man reminded us that listening is how freedom begins. Outside, the stars blinked like silent witnesses, and far away, walking through the tall grass of a field lit by fireflies, a man hummed a familiar tune. No crown, no guards, just boots dust and the sound of a continent breathing again. His name was never the point, but Africa remembered it anyway. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the servant who showed a people how to serve themselves. And so long after his footprints faded from the soil, his impact remained etched into every breath of the land. They no longer waited for rescue. They no longer feared the silence of power. Instead, they filled it with song, with sweat, with structure. In every village square, they repeated a new mantra to their children. We are not the children of slaves. We are the ancestors of nations yet to be born. Traoré's story became a story not about a hero who saved a people, but about a people who remembered they never needed saving, only awakening. The world still watches. Some still dismiss. Some still plot. But the continent no longer asks for permission to rise. It simply rises. And in the rustle of leaves, in the rhythm of hammers on bricks, in the laughter of children drawing blueprints in the dirt, his name continues, not shouted, not chanted, but lived. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a leader who vanished into legend not because he disappeared, but because he became the voice that never needed a microphone again. The revolution wasn't televised, it was planted, and it is still growing.